We stand on a crossroad now. Either keep working in Compositor without leaving Blender, or save the light groups to an EXR file so we can access it anytime without re-rendering. If you choose to do compositing right away after hitting the render button, then you simply carry on. The basic operation when working with light groups is using the Mix node to add layers together, to compose them together, and then use the Mix slider to define the amount. This is it. That's the basic way of adding the light passes together. That being said, I'll choose the second road, I think, to export all these light groups or passes to a separate file to keep it safe. So I'll go Image Editor. This should be our rendered result. Then Image, Save As. Remember, we've talked about the benefits of 32-bit EXRs in the first chapter. On top of being the best interchange format for holding the unbounded light values, it also has an amazing feature storing multiple passes in one file. For that, we will need to choose the multi-layer OpenEXR format. That's gonna be robo_render_01EXR. We can try firing up a new Blender file now and try importing our newly created multi-layer EXR there. Here I'm in a Compositor in the Blender already. Click Use Nodes. The default render layers node can go. Then Input, Image. Now it's time to find our EXR. And here we go. As we can see, it unpacked the light groups very nicely indeed. Everything is in place. The order got messed up a bit though, I think, but I can live with that. The color space should default to linear like it did here, and the layer should be the view layer. Okay, so far so good. There was no quality loss, by the way. The layers from the imported file should look just like the layers after hitting the render button. We can activate Backdrop Preview now, and we are all set. Compositing the light layers together is actually surprisingly easy after the layers themselves were all set. As a quick reminder, Ctrl-Shift-Click launches the preview, and consecutive clicks switch through the outputs. Right, so everything was imported. We can preview those layers really quickly. Starting with the HDRI environment, I'll gradually reconstruct our final lighting setup first by adding these layers together one by one. All layer mixing operations are done with the Mix node. So here I'm dragging the key light output into the second image slot and changing the blending mode to Add. We can decide how much of this key light group do we want to have in our composite. Do we want to have a full effect or just a little bit of that light and so on. Now, if we wanted to tweak the exposure or some other property of that layer, the adjustment layer is plugged like in between. The thing about the mix factor though is that it can go higher than 1 to linearly increase the amount of exposure by that factor in that light group that is being mixed with some other light group. Incidentally, the data from our multi-layer EXR file still goes through the Blender's color management pipeline, namely through the Filmic View transform that prepares it for our displays and is affected by exposure and other settings there. In our original RoboCharacter scene, the exposure was brought down to -2 to start from a dimmed down base. But then we can also play with the base contrast, either via the Look drop-down menu or, let's say, by adjusting the curves. The S-shaped curve boosts the contrast, for example, and more sophisticated color tweaks require tinkering around with the red, green and blue channels. Personally, I love playing with the complementary color contrasts by cranking up, let's say, green in the highlights and bringing it down in the shadows. The same for the blue channel. It is worth noting that the whole view transform and color management thing is applied the last, after the post-pro chain in Blender Compositor is evaluated. And it is instantaneous. It doesn't need any sort of calculation, which is a nice bonus. To sum it up, it's never a wrong time to make adjustment to such fundamental things as exposure and the contrast levels. What I did is reduced exposure all the way to -2 to keep the lighting levels fairly low key, and then this color grading mastering with RGB curves on top of it. Nothing too fancy though.